Okay, so yes, the Yoshi-P effect, the parasocial relationships. Before we dive into this topic, I would like to tell you a little bit about parasocial relationships from the theoretical background. And there are just three main takeaways that I would like to have here. So first of all, what are parasocial relationships? It's a one-sided emotional bond that is formed with people we don't know. Mostly celebrities, sports actors, singers, video game streamers, Instagram influencers, and any other people with whom we don't have a direct exchange. They are widely recognized as one-sided, but at the same time, they can be just as powerful as a real relationship and give the feeling of love, trust, affiliation, care, and so on. And parasocial relationships happen within the smaller instances of so-called parasocial interaction, so wider parasocial phenomena, where direct exposure to the target, to the persona behind the relationship takes place. And this is how they're supported and maintained within the bigger framework of the relationship. And they have been studied in relation to celebrities, social media influencers. In video game world, it was video game streamers, fictional characters as well, but I was not able to find any research that would be dedicated to game developers or other creative professionals, specifically in their creative capacity. So here's my research question. This research was done as a part of my master thesis, which is focused on business psychology. So the main question is business psychology oriented. However, in order to delve into that, of course, the prime topic was parasocial relationships in video games. The approach I chose for the study is case study design, and the game I selected for this is Final Fantasy XIV. Now, a little bit of a background. Games are generally separated into two major types. There are so-called single-player games where it's you and your computer. Of course, you can talk to other players about this, but generally it's your personal experience. And then there are online multiplayer games where you interact with other players for the sake of completing game objectives. And massively multiplayer online games, or MMOs, are the ones where you coexist with the people in the same space. You see them, you interact with them all the time, and you don't have any way of avoiding them, so to speak. So Final Fantasy XIV is the MMO installment of the long and very well revered Japanese series of Final Fantasy games, the first of which was published in 1987. But most of them were single-player games, and Final Fantasy XIV is the first MMO in the series that was specifically targeted for the global market. It is published by the Japan publisher Square Enix, and unfortunately, when it was first released in 2010, it was a massive critical failure. The scope of this failure was never fully disclosed because Square Enix likes to keep all the information to themselves, but it nearly bankrupted the company, which is one of the major producers. That imagine some new series bankrupt Netflix or something like that. But because Final Fantasy as a series has such a huge legacy behind its name, they, before just scrapping it, they tried to salvage it. They appointed a new development team that was essentially given a poisonous gift, as one of my participants put it, the poisonous gift of trying to salvage what's happening. And so they did. And one of the things that they selected is the transparency and eye-level communication, where they inform the player base about every single thing they're going in the game. And this is what makes it so interesting in the scope of this research topic. And this is also one of the things that brought Final Fantasy to the status. They not just salvaged the game, it's one of the most popular games in the world right now and is the most popular installment in the entire Final Fantasy series. So I have conducted 10 semi-structured interviews with players from Europe and the US with a very basic requirement. They have to have at least 1 year of continuous Final Fantasy XIV experience and some exposure to the development team, so to speak, so that they have some experiences or impressions that they would like to share. And the interview took part in 2 rounds. First of all, obviously gathering data, and then when I was done with my analysis, I showed it to my participants to get their feedback in case they would like to have something amended. And here's what I found out. So, first of all, parasocial relationships with game developers exist. Yay. And what's interesting here is that despite obviously being the employees of the company appointed by the company, they're seen more like actors on the player's side. They're not the corporate leeches who try to drag something out of you, but on the other side, they're defenders of the Final Fantasy and its culture in front of the corporate greed of the Square Enix, who as a developer is seen in a very negative light. So Yoshi is good, we'll get back. The development team is good, the company is bad. They are our protectors. And Parasocial relationships with developers. First of all, it increases the enjoyment and satisfaction with the game. It ensures that the game is safe to invest into. And like I mentioned before, the multiplayer games, they are not finished stories. They rely on people coming every day, every month, year after year. And successful MMOs can last for over a decade, maybe 2 decades even, because they have this different business model. Also, parasocial relationship reduces the impact of negative experiences, and what is relevant for our topic here, it facilitates community building and serves as a bonding topic for the community. How do they form? First of all, the game has to pass several checkpoints. You can see them on the left side. It should provide ample and correct, appropriate ways of socialization. The game should respect the player's agency, the ability to choose their own adventure, essentially. It should provide variability, so plenty of different options to choose from. And it should give a sense of accomplishment, not just achievement, but specifically something that makes you feel like you passed the check mark, you did well. When these 4 drivers are successfully activated, so to speak, the players become engaged and the game becomes a self-sufficient experience. And somewhere in this area is where parasocial relationships begin to form. First of all, is looking for information. When you like the game, you want to know what is coming next, what news of development, what should we expect. But as you do so, you get exposed to the development team and you start to like them, not just for the news that they bring, but also as the people that they are. And the outcomes of this engagement are very positive. It enhances the sense of belonging, brings a lot of dedication, makes people promote the game, engage with the game outside of gaming sessions, and makes people very lenient towards mistakes. And somewhere between the second part, there is something that adopts the Yoshi-P effect, which is not the official title, but it highlights the difference of Final Fantasy XIV compared to other development tips and other games. Because the Yoshi-P effects can be summarized in one simple phrase. If you treat your players like human beings, they will like you more. Riveting. Surprisingly, this is not a very common approach in modern industry, where other producers, other developers utilize methods that are described as exploitative, manipulative, Skinner boxes that just press the buttons to drag every little bit of what you want to say, or as one of my participants put it, the Final Fantasy team is a refreshing wind in a world that is full of lying, scheming, gaslighting, and manipulation. So, who is Yoshi-P and how do they achieve these outstanding results? So, Yoshi-P is the game director of Final Fantasy XIV, who was appointed after the first failure and was tasked with salvaging it. You can see him on the top and on the bottom on the left. And the fact that the game director is so open in communication is itself something unheard of, because normally the task of communication with the community is put on the PR managers, community managers, regional managers, some other managers. So it's the people who are not directly responsible for the game. They're essentially hired employees who will tell whatever they're told to tell. Here to have a the game director, and until recently a board member of the entire Square Enix, sit in front of you directly and tell you, we are going to do this and this. Thank you very much for doing this and this. First of all, it gives a lot of confidence in the development because it's coming directly from the decision maker. And secondly, it shows a lot of, how to put it, metaphorical confidence, that the team is so confident in what they're doing that they're not afraid to put the top head in front of the people to tell things, because they know that whatever they will say will be accepted positively. So during live streams that take place every 2 to 3 months and they last 3 to 5 hours, they feature the face of the game, Yoshi-P, and also other prominent figures depending on the topic of the stream, which are multiple and all are well recognized in the community. This is the main parasocial interaction that facilitates parasocial relationship. Then there is also written communication, live appearances during fan festivals, gaming conventions, and so on, and also own gaming experience, but more on that later. So what makes Final Fantasy XIV team so successful in that? Them, again, being human beings. when they, like you can see on this picture, this is a very casual stream. They're not on the stage. Sometimes they do come on the stage when it's a very important announcement, but mostly it's just a room where they sit and chat. They chat with the audience, they chat with each other, and it shows that they're not just co-workers, but they're also friends. And they do this in a very friendly, very informal, very relaxed atmosphere, which just makes you feeling like you're also sitting in a living room with them. And so the players also describe that they do certain things that can be described as watching parties, which might be not as impressive until you know that quite often the streams are held in Japanese time, which is okay for the American audience. For European, it means like with the wee hours of the night. Yet still people gather at like 1, 2 a.m. on a weekday to watch what is going on and to know the news for the first time. And they share this sense of affiliation that we're the first to know about this and we can share this live, and this social effervescence that serves as emotional contagion to facilitate this love for the development team. And there are four main building blocks. First of all, authenticity. The developers are perceived as very genuine and humble, and again, human people, compared to many other developers, for example, that quite often give scripted answers, so you can sometimes see them reading answers off the teleprompter. Here they just speak for themselves and share their own impressions. They obviously love the game, and it's known, it's a fact that they also play the game, and you can actually run into them on Japanese servers. They frequently show appreciation for the community that goes beyond mere formalities, thank you for your money. And they're always determined to give the best product possible, the first example of which would be the restart of the servers, because again, it was an action that was not heard neither before nor after in the gaming world. If the game is not flying, you just forget about this. You don't relaunch, rewrite the entire game and start it up in less than a year. And you don't release it with a name a bit on the nose, A Realm Reborn. So these things facilitate parasocial relationships because they show that this is the team that you can really relate to. And what's interesting here, at least for me, that there are two types of parasocial relationship. First of all is the classic PSR, so to speak, when you interact with game developers as public figures during streams, and it's the specific contained parasocial instance interaction that facilitates it. But then what's interesting is that there is also the indirect PSR, where you interact not with developers as people, but with the game as their creative output, which is formed through the topics that are raised in the story, the conflicts, how these conflicts are being resolved, character developments, the game design philosophy, like how do they expect you to play the game? Also community guidelines, what are you as a player, as the person behind the character are allowed to say or not allowed to say. And all these things, in players' opinion, send a very clear message about what they are as a people. And one of my participants just encapsulated it in a very nice phrase: toxic people cannot create something so kind. So the game itself serves as a testimony to the moral and psychological qualities of the development team, which again reinforces that they're people on your side and you can rely on them, you can trust them. Now, a little bit about the Final Fantasy XIV community culture. I won't go into this detail. I hope this will remain on the recording, but that itself deserves another presentation. So mostly it's very strong social focus with a community that is known among other MMOs as genuinely friendly, genuinely helpful, always very welcoming towards newcomers. It has very strong casual focus that again, makes very strong teaching and learning opportunities instead of pushing people for performance, although it's not without downsides. There, like every block has its strong sides and the bad sides, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Community has very strong sense of community, which is also not very common. That leads to the sense that we must transmit this knowledge, this experience to other people. I was welcomed very warmly when I started playing, so I want to make sure that other people who come to the game when I'm already a veteran get the same treatment. They also get the same patience and love and welcoming atmosphere that I received back in the day. They're very loyal to the developer team, often to a fault, something that comes very close to idol worship, with the obvious downside that you can't say anything wrong and they never do anything wrong. There is a strong respect for the story and strict guideline enforcement, which on one side presents a lot of consistency and transparency, and also Participants from more vulnerable groups such as queer players, female players say that Final Fantasy XIV is the only game where they truly feel safe. But at the same time, it can result in self-censorship and a lot of passive aggressiveness because the conflicts cannot be resolved directly in the chat. So they have either to be taken elsewhere or rupture in some other third passive aggressive ways. And all these things are largely and quite directly formulated by the development culture and the game design behind the game. So it's directly transmitted by developers and recognized as the work of the developers. We're playing the game of Yoshi-P. We're playing the game of these people who want this game to be played this way. And with this, we show our affiliation and our dedication and loyalty to them. There is a lot of respect to how the game should be played because it is connected to the people, because of this parasocial relationship. So to summarize, Final Fantasy XIV players as a community have distinct social norms that make them distinct from the game itself. They're aware of these differences and take pride in them, are determined to preserve this culture and to transmit it to newcomers, and often have an independent I am a Final Fantasy XIV player, along with other identities that they may have. And very saliently, this comes through the situations of interaction with other games or when other players, unfortunately, I won't be able to talk about this into detail now because it will require its own presentation. But if anybody is interested, please look up the so-called World of Warcraft refugee crisis, which is one of the best encapsulated and best documented situations of culture clash in MMOs and video games. Very last slide, very shortly, the overlap, the interplay between the national culture and the digital culture. Here, it must be mentioned that there is no other large Asian or Japanese MMO. So the Yoshi-P team is essentially its own benchmark. And here are two things that I find very interesting is that the comparison between the Western developers and specifically Yoshi-P team, the Final Fantasy XIV team, is not often in the favor of the former, where Western developers are often described as arrogant, pushy, disrespectful. The Western world is riddled with scandals, absolutely abhorrent scandals about sexual misconduct, toxic workplace culture, harassment, and so on. Meanwhile, there is Yoshi-P who does absolutely nothing wrong. Or if he does something wrong, it's strictly about the game itself and not about him as a person. And a lot of this is associated with specifically with Japanese culture, Japanese national culture that has been transmitted to European and American audiences. And the second thing that I found very interesting is that the live streams are done in Japanese with consequent translations, so not even synchronous. And my participants reported that in a way it makes them more trustworthy because you cannot be led astray by the speech. You can only judge their body language, you can only judge their non-verbal cues, and that itself makes it more trustworthy because it's something that cannot be faked. And so there's visible divergence from the cultural standards, again, when a Japanese 50-something salaryman from a big corporation cries on stage, this is seen as absolutely earth-shattering. This would not have this effects if it was somebody else in some other situation or some other culture. So very briefly about limitation, this was just a probing research to see if there was anything to research at all. Thankfully there was, but obviously it opens a lot of questions, like how does it work in other genres? How does it work in other MMOs? Obviously they do have their own forms of parasocial relationships, but why with them? What is different there? Then the entire question of the life cycle of parasocial relationships, how much is too much for them to have a parasocial breakup, for example. Direct and indirect PSR, engagement with creative output rather than directly with a person, cross-cultural perception of communication, which we just discussed, the influence of body language and other non-verbal cues as perception of authenticity, and more about the gaming community's cultural agents. So here are my references, image attributions, thanks.